Tonight, two elections, two incredibly tight races, and here in this crucial swing state of Michigan, just 2 weeks to go.
I believe that people are going to see Michigan turn red.
From the pulpit to the drive-through, the promises and personal attacks defining one of the final campaign weekends in the U.S. election. Meanwhile, in BC, it's still too close to call.
The final story of this election has not been written yet.
99% of votes have been counted. Why it could still take a week to know the winner. Torrential rains, flash floods, and mudslides in Metro Vancouver.
I haven't seen this kind of damage from flash floods. It's terrible.
How the atmospheric river overwhelmed defenses.
From CBC News, this is The National with Ian Hannah-Mansing in Detroit, Michigan.
With just 2 weeks to go before the U.S. presidential election, the race is getting more intense, especially in swing states like Michigan, where we are tonight. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are pulling out all the stops to win over voters. And if you want a reminder of just how much every single vote can matter, just take a look at British Columbia. Polls in the provincial election there closed last night. There is still no clear winner. Some races so close, just a few dozen votes separating the candidates. And so we will have to wait until every vote is counted to find out who will lead the province. Will the NDP form government for the third time in a row? Or will the Conservatives take power for the first time in decades? Susanna De Silva shows us what happens now.
In downtown Vancouver, a whole lot of rain and uncertainty. A day after the provincial election, it's still not clear whether the NDP or the Conservatives won.
It's just typical, politics. Anytime there's politics involved, you never know what's coming.
I'm not surprised that we're so divided. I mean, households are divided, families are divided, people are really polarized.
As the votes rolled in, it became clear neither party would be able to claim a quick victory. The votes were just too close, and they're still being counted. 47 seats are needed to form a majority government. As it stands, the NDP are leading or elected in 46, the BC Conservatives in 45, and the Green Party in 2. That could give it the balance of power. There are 11 ridings that are too close for CBC News to project a winner. So far, the riding of Richmond-Steveston has the largest gap between the two top candidates, 435 votes. The riding of Wanda Fuka-Malahat has the smallest gap with just 23 votes.
There is also another message in this narrowest of margins. That's we got to do better.
The results are a blow to the governing NDP. Leader David Eby acknowledging the party failed to connect with voters frustrated over the cost of living and public safety. And in a statement Sunday, he said his party was committed to working with the legislature you elected to deliver for you.
I'm optimistic that the final story of this election has not been written yet.
But BC Conservative leader John Rustad is saying not so fast. And even if it is the NDP who forms a minority government, they vow to take them down.
We're telling all of our candidates, take down their signs, but keep them handy, don't throw them out.
The Green Party could negotiate a deal to support the NDP as it did in 2017, but the parties disagree on issues like the carbon tax and drug policy, leaving the question of how long that deal could last.
Depends what the ransom is from the Greens and if the NDP is willing to pay it.
Some mail-in ballots still need to be counted, and there will be at least 2 official recounts because the vote difference is less than 100 votes. All of that counting will happen this weekend.
And Susie, as you mentioned, this isn't the first time the BC has had results this close. What are some of the scenarios that can play out here?
Yeah, that's right. Back in 2017, the then BC Liberals won a very slim minority government, and then leader Christy Clark could not maintain the confidence of the legislature. That's when the NDP took over with the support of the Green Party. That is a scenario that could happen again. If the Conservatives were to win the most seats but fail to win a majority, the NDP would still get the first chance to govern, but of course would need the support of the Greens. Ian?
Susanna De Silva in Vancouver. The cleanup continues in Metro Vancouver after a weekend of torrential rain triggered flash floods. At least one person is missing after a mudslide washed away a home. Yvette Bren shows us the damage.
An atmospheric river drenching the south coast for 3 days, flooding roads, yards.
It was virtually wall-to-wall water coming down, and this time The water came up very quickly.
Jacob Goodman acted fast to try to keep the Seymour River out of his home.
I woke up and kind of heard rumbling around me, and I kind of heard it before because past years I've heard lots of rocks coming down the creek that goes down the side of our house. And I haven't seen this kind of, damage from floods or flash floods or whatever this clog is, but it's terrible.
Rushing water swelled creeks into rapids, swept away rocks, roads, anything in its path. Coquitlam, an eastern suburb of Vancouver, got an incredible 233 millimeters of rain. It all triggered a mudslide that hit a home. The resident remains missing.
The entire mountain was an absolute mess. There were creeks everywhere where creeks did not exist.
Creeks and roads suddenly turned into raging rivers, leaving 3 hikers stranded. Searchers found them and staged a difficult rescue. The first significant storm of the season dumped record rainfall. Vancouver's airport got more rain in a few days than in the entire month of October. The deluge overwhelmed even storm drains that cost millions to upgrade to handle big storms, flooding homes, even muddying Vancouver's drinking water.
Extreme rainfall on the steep mountainous terrain above Coquitlam Reservoir has resulted in drinking water turbidity, some cloudiness.
Flooding was localized, but those affected were left scrambling.
No one at the end of the day wants to have their house get flooded.
Now they're left with a lot of cleanup and questions about whether their homes will be safe next time. Yvette Brent, CBC News, Vancouver.
Authorities in Georgia are trying to figure out what caused part of a dock to collapse, killing 7 people.
The initial findings of our investigation at this point show a catastrophic failure of the gangway, causing it to collapse.
It happened Saturday afternoon on Sapelo Island, where crowds had gathered for an annual cultural celebration. Around 20 people fell into the water when the gangway suddenly collapsed as the ferry was boarding. 3 people remain in hospital tonight in critical condition. I've been here in the U.S. for the national and cross-country checkup, talking to Americans as they make their picks for president. And as Karen Paul shows us, with just over 2 weeks left in the race, the jabs, the rhetoric, and the sales pitches are heating up.
That's great, thank you.
Donald Trump swapped his suit jacket for a McDonald's apron, making fries and serving customers.
This is fun, I could do this all day.
In a photo op designed to tear down his opponent. He's accusing Kamala Harris of lying about working at the fast food chain during her college years, but offering no proof.
Now worked for 15 minutes more than Kamala. Okay, she never worked here.
Harris, meanwhile, was celebrating her 60th birthday at a Baptist church as she asked Black Christian voters to support a campaign called Souls to the Polls.
In this moment, our country is at a crossroads, and where we go from here is up to us.
Her appeal to voters' morality in Georgia, a sharp contrast to Trump's vulgarity in Pennsylvania. At a rally in the hometown of Arnold Palmer Saturday, Trump made crude comments about the late golf legend.
He took showers with the other pros. They came out of there, they said, oh my God, that's unbelievable.
And used offensive language to insult Harris.
You're a shit vice president.
Pennsylvania also the site of $1 million giveaway from Trump supporter Elon Musk.
Tonight's person is John Prayer.
The check going to a registered voter who signed a petition by his super PAC, part of an effort to get more people to register to vote in the state, drawing concern from Pennsylvania's governor.
I think there are real questions with how he is spending money in this race, how the dark money is flowing, not just into Pennsylvania, but apparently now into the pockets of Pennsylvanians.
Musk is promising another giveaway every day until the election, and that is now just 2 weeks away. Karen Pauls, CBC News, Washington.
And coming up on The Breakdown, I'll speak with Black voters here in Detroit, some who want to see Donald Trump back in the White House. That is in about 20 minutes. In the Middle East, Israel conducted a wave of airstrikes across Lebanon, targeting a financial association linked with Hezbollah. These blasts were right next to Beirut's airport. Israel's defense forces promised to carry out a large number of strikes on the organization it says finances Hezbollah activities. Briar Stewart is in Jerusalem tracking the situation tonight. And Briar, Israel warned these strikes were coming.
Just before the strikes got underway, Ian, people located near specific buildings were alerted that they need to leave quickly and be at least 500 meters away. There were reports that sidewalks and streets were clogged with people trying to get out of the area. Now, Israel is targeting the financial arm of Hezbollah, a group that has been declared a terrorist organization by several countries, including Canada. And specifically, they're targeting a financial institution called Al-Qard Al-Hassan. There's 30 branches across Lebanon, and not only is it used by Hezbollah, but by a few thousand Lebanese residents as well. There are reports that there were a few dozen strikes across the country tonight, and as Israel continues its offensive there, it is also heavily targeting northern Gaza.
Rescuers believe that underneath all of this, people still may be trapped. This block is in the city of Bet Latya in the north of Gaza. It was hit by strikes late Saturday night. We rushed out to the screaming of women and children. We found out that our neighbors were targeted with bombs, says resident Ahmed El-Hajim. The injured, including young children, were taken to one of Gaza's remaining hospitals. The dead were lined up outside. Health officials say at least 87 were killed in the strike. Israel's military calls that an exaggeration. Its targeting of northern Gaza, where it says Hamas militants have dug in, is visible here, just 2 kilometers away. It feels much further.
This crowd is here for the start of a 2-day event focused on the future of Gaza. They're not talking about rebuilding it, but how to resettle it.
Those gathered here are Israeli settlers. Hundreds of thousands of them live in the occupied West Bank, and those here have their sights set on Gaza.
What do you want to see happen to Gaza?
I want to see it full of life. The only way to see it full of life is with Jews live there.
As for the war being waged across the field, Chaim Walzer wishes Israel pushed harder from the beginning.
In all this battle, a lot of Jewish soldiers were killed because we had too much empathy, which we shouldn't have had. But
too much empathy.
Empathy. Any other nation would make it much worse.
Israel says it will persevere until it's rooted out all militants. Just what will become of Gaza's blackened neighborhoods is still very unclear.
The UN has condemned the strikes in northern Gaza. Humanitarian groups have called the situation dire. There's not enough aid, and the hospitals that are functioning are overwhelmed.
Briar Stewart in Jerusalem. For the 4th time in 48 hours, Cuba's electrical grid has failed, leaving millions without power. And making matters worse, a hurricane has just made landfall. As Lisa Xing tells us, it's threatening to make a dangerous situation even worse.
Protests echo through the streets of Havana after another night lit only by lanterns and candles. Without electricity, we have nothing, says this woman. We don't have food, we don't have a way to work. Except for hotels and hospitals, 10 million people were without power when Cuba's national electrical grid crashed Friday. 4 tries to get things running again failed, leaving residents like Annabelle Gonzalez with even less than usual. Everything has gone to waste, the little I have. This is the only water I have. Outages are frequent on the island nation, though none this bad in recent years. The blackout affecting other vital services like water supply, since the pumps run on electricity. The economy paralyzed as the government shuttered all non-essential state services and businesses, including schools. The subsidized ration lines are longer than usual. The situation is bad, says this man. I'm 74 years old and I've never seen this before. Amidst an ongoing economic crisis, Cuba's communist government blames fuel shortages and the U.S. trade embargo and sanctions, as well as deteriorating infrastructure. We've been operating for many years without access to spare parts, says Cuba's energy minister. Canada's former ambassador to Cuba says countries like Canada need to help.
The Cuban people are in a very difficult situation, and one can debate political systems till the cows come home. That's not the issue here.
While Hurricane Oscar, which made landfall in Cuba this afternoon, threatens to make things worse, the Cuban people, no strangers to hardship, are making the best of it as they wait, going about their lives in darkness, at least until morning. Lisa Shing, CBC News, Toronto.
More than 500 kinds of frozen waffles sold in Canada and the U.S. are being recalled tonight over fears of listeria. Treehouse Foods issued the voluntary recall after testing an Ontario manufacturing facility. The affected brands include Walmart's Great Value, as well as No Name, Compliments, and Selection. There have been no confirmed reports of illness. Alberta food safety experts are concerned that the growing market for halal food products is fueling an underground business. Documents obtained by CBC News paint a concerning picture of the meat that's making it to market. As Terry Reith shows us, some products labeled halal are anything but.
When people buy halal meat, it comes with an expectation that animals have been raised and butchered ethically and the meat is clean and hygienic. But documents obtained by CBC News through Freedom of Information paint a different picture. Dingy barns, unsanitary conditions. According to Alberta Agriculture Field Reports, some farms purporting halal slaughter practices are operating as large-scale commercial abattoirs, where animals are not treated in a humane fashion. Some in horrible shape, with broken backs, abscesses, and upper respiratory issues.
Oh my goodness. Some of the meat being sold for human consumption includes parts which are not food safe.
Potentially a serious threat to public health, says this meat microbiologist.
There's a lot of animal diseases. We don't want meat from diseased animals going into our food supply, point blank.
In April, Alberta Health Services inspectors ordered 7 halal butchers, grocers, and a catering company closed. Then the RCMP raided this farm near Calgary and arrested 4 men, charging them with illegal slaughter and sale of livestock. 3 pleaded guilty and were fined. 1 is still before the courts. For nearly 2 million Muslims in Canada, halal is important. It means permissible, and slaughter must be done with strict adherence to ensure the least suffering for the animal and the highest quality of the meat. This halal butcher says animals chosen for slaughter must be healthy.
We lay the animal on its side. We allow the animal to completely calm down. What I usually do is I put my hand on its chest and feel its heartbeat.
Before the animal is slaughtered, he prays in accordance with religious principles, then cuts the animal's jugular, ensuring a quick death. Muslim leaders are calling for a national body to ensure that products which are claimed as halal are safe, inspected, and follow the correct religious protocols. Terry Reith, CBC News, Edmonton.
New Brunswick is getting ready to elect its next premier, and it looks like we're in for another tight race.
For me, this is very strategic.
The key issues in an election that could come down to the wire. Plus, a fixed price with some fine print.
It's not right. They are gouging people, and people are hurting today.
Why Rogers is being accused of misleading customers. And crowning a new Canadian champion.
Natasha Wodak gets gold.
We're back in 2.
Winning here in the Canadian Championships at the DCS Toronto Waterfront Marathon, Natasha Wodak.
Canada's Natasha Wodak won her first national title Sunday at Toronto Waterfront Marathon. The Surrey, BC runner posted her best time ever. Justin Kent also claimed his first Canadian title, his 7th place finish, the best by a Canadian man. In just hours, voters in New Brunswick will head to the polls. Progressive Conservative Blaine Higgs is seeking a 3rd term as premier. As Kayla Hounsell tells us, many voters say they're ready for change, but not sure how best to get it.
On a beautiful fall day, Cara Winia is out picking apples with her daughter, still thinking about who she'll pick to represent her in the legislature the day before New Brunswick's fall election.
Part of me wants to
go the other direction and really try and give some power to someone that hasn't maybe won yet.
Good apple?
Good apple.
The issues top of mind as she makes that decision are similar to many other New Brunswickers.
Healthcare and groceries.
Healthcare, of course, the environment, healthcare, education.
Education, the cause of controversy that led to a revolt within the Progressive Conservative Party. Leader Blaine Higgs revised the province's policy on gender identity to prevent teachers from using a student's preferred pronouns without their parents' consent. One card-carrying PC member of nearly 40 years still doesn't know how to vote because of it.
It would bother me to vote for something I don't believe in. However, more than ever for me, this is very strategic.
Higgs has tried to link the New Brunswick Liberal leader to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
Did you know that Liberal leader Susan Holt's election platform mentions the word liberal only once? I wonder why that is.
Susan Holt pivoted away from the Liberal brand. She branded her campaign Team Holt from the very beginning, knowing full well that Justin Trudeau is unpopular.
In the last hours of the campaign, candidates continued to knock doors, knowing every vote will count in what could be a tight race.
Good one.
With some looking for change.
It's been a lot of the same over the years.
Right here. The province itself has also changed, with extraordinary population growth since the last election. New people with no old allegiances, making the election results even more unpredictable. Kayla Hounsell, CBC News, Scotch Settlement, New Brunswick.
A Rogers TV customer says her bill suddenly shot up despite signing a 2-year deal.
It's obviously a bait and switch here.
The surprise that lurks in some cable contracts. Plus,
we're all rooting for Kamala Harris right now.
A divided Detroit.
People said Trump, Trump.
That could decide the presidency in an election some voters still don't trust.
Do you run into election denial in your own life?
All the time.
The tone on the ground in Michigan. The National breaks down the stories shaping our world. Next. Thousands of protesters marched across Spain's Canary Islands, demanding a change to the current tourism model. They say over-tourism is leading to higher housing prices and lower wages for residents. More than 16 million tourists visited the islands last year. Some frustrated Rogers customers are going public tonight, saying they feel misled. They signed 2-year contracts only to find out the prices for their TV boxes were suddenly going up. Erica Johnson looks into why the company isn't budging.
This is the box.
Kathy Cooper has 6 TV boxes that give her and her family access to cable and streaming apps. So she wasn't happy to learn that Rogers was upping the monthly price on all but one of them by $7 a piece.
It's not right. They are gouging people, and people are hurting today.
Cooper signed a 2-year Rogers contract for TV and internet in June, says she was guaranteed a price. But when she called to complain about her bills shooting up, a Rogers rep told her price guarantees do not apply to rental equipment like TV boxes.
All I get is the same over and over again. We have legal right to charge for our equipment. That's it.
Other customers tell Go Public they too felt misled when they signed 2-year contracts, thinking the monthly price was guaranteed, calling it a cash grab and shady.
It's obviously a bait and switch here. So you sign up, you lock in, and then suddenly you're kind of out of luck.
This tech policy expert says it's unfair for Rogers to quote one price and charge another.
I think consumers have a very reasonable expectation that the terms of that 2-year contract aren't going to change in that time frame.
Rogers declined an interview request. In a statement, a spokesperson repeated Rogers is allowed to change the monthly rate to rent equipment and said the company was making record investments in technology. Canada's Competition Bureau opposed Rogers buying Shaw last year and says since the merger, it's received a significant number of complaints about price increases, although Rogers says its TV and internet bundles have come down 5%.
We are currently experiencing higher than normal call volumes.
Meanwhile, Cooper sent back 2 TV boxes to cut costs and, after complaining a lot, got a $315 credit.
She did look into canceling her contract, but the penalty for that, $720. Erica Johnson, CBC News, Vancouver.
Our Go Public stories come from you. If you have a tip for the team to investigate, send an email to gopublic@cbc.ca. Now, let's break down the news shaping our world. How one Michigan county helped tear down public trust in U.S. election results.
This election is election on steroids.
But first, the view from Detroit. Why black voters could hand this swing state to Donald Trump.
People have been inundated with lies that Donald Trump is the boogeyman.
The economy was not bad when Donald Trump was president.
But opinions are varied, and they could change.
Once upon a time, I was for Trump, but he's just gotten out of control.
I spoke with some people in Detroit's African American community to ask if Trump's pitch for their support is working.
The God who is mighty in battle protected Donald Trump because
When Pastor Lorenzo Sewell gave his electrifying speech at the Republican National Convention this summer,
President Trump came to a church that is in a Democratic stronghold.
he wasn't just speaking to the party faithful in Milwaukee.
He came to a church to listen to average, everyday Americans like you and like me.
He was also sending a message to his home city of Detroit. Simply put, Donald Trump is the best choice for African Americans. After all, Trump came to Sewell's church in the city's west side, what the pastor describes as the hood.
People said, Trump, Trump. And I got a little nervous because they don't shout Jesus like that, you see? So
It's called Church 180, the name symbolizing its mission to turn lives around and maybe presidential campaigns too.
If you go beyond this church, if we walk down the street, what would people be saying about Donald Trump?
Well, people have been inundated with lies that Donald Trump is the boogeyman. People have been inundated with false truths that he's a threat to democracy. But he came to this church. And when President Donald Trump came to the church, he did what no Republican has ever done since I was born. So if you travel around this community and you ask people, did you know that President Trump actually came to a church in your community? You showed them that round table in the RNC speech, they're going to be encouraged. And they're going to say, wow, at least he came.
Traditionally, African American voters here in Detroit overwhelmingly support the Democratic candidate. So could Donald Trump actually be on the verge of a major breakthrough? Like so much else in politics ahead of Election Day, it depends on who you ask. Are you willing to say who you're going to vote for?
Absolutely. I'm voting for Kamala.
Same. We're all rooting for Kamala Harris right now. You know, once upon a time, I was for Trump, but he's just gotten out of control. I don't know if it's, you know, the age that, I don't know. It's just not, the things that he say doesn't add up.
Yeah, the mudslinging and the, deflammatory rhetoric, I'm just not with that. It's just taking us from the real issues.
Is there anything you think for you or your friends that might make you think about voting for Donald Trump?
Donald Trump, you know, to be truthful, he's not a bad guy because he speaks up what's on his mind. But, so you know exactly where he's coming from, you know, but the economy was not bad when Donald Trump was president. He's right about that. I can't fault him for that. It's just that I can't get with the abortion thing. I can't, too many females in my family, you know, that are against that.
The policies that may come out of one of the other candidates could be strikingly different, dramatically different for Canadians. It might.
But political reporter Ken Coleman points out Trump isn't trying to win over the majority of black Michigan residents. He only needs a few.
Donald Trump in 2016 won Michigan by 10,000 votes. And so I think the strategy is, as I talk to Trump supporters, even some of whom are African American, they know that most African Americans aren't going to vote for Donald Trump. But if he can sway 5,000 or 10,000, maybe in Detroit proper and Flint, in Battle Creek, other urban areas, maybe 5 or 10,000 in each one of those cities, it might be just enough to win Michigan.
April Anderson is a Harris loyalist. The vice president even visited her shop, Good Cakes and Bakes, leading up to the last election. Anderson will enthusiastically list all the reasons she and other African Americans should support Harris, and yet some of her own family are pro-Trump.
You said you have 7 relatives who are going to vote for Trump? Why?
Yes. Again, they're young, African American, and they believe that Trump gave them money during the pandemic. They believe that, and they believe that when he gets back in office, he's going to do it again. They believe that when he gets back in office, that the ones who vote with the stock market believes that the stock market is going to be better when he gets in office. It's all financial gain is all they're looking at.
Harris may have another problem. Despite the warm reception during her visits to Michigan, she could be facing an obstacle no campaign stop can overcome.
There is a gender gap. There are African American men here in Detroit and other spaces in our state who aren't really comfortable with a woman as president. There are some who aren't ready for an African American woman the president, U.S. president, let alone Detroit mayor. Unlike a lot of American major cities, we've never had a black woman as mayor in a town that is largely Democratic, and the biggest, sort of the biggest gender and ethnic group within that Democratic Party base are black women. That's the irony.
Just over 2 weeks to voting day, the race in Michigan is too close to call, according to political analysts. But Pastor Sewell is eager to share his prediction.
I believe that people are going to see Michigan turn red. I believe that people are going to see the silent majority. They're going to see black Americans make a decision to come off of the Democratic plantation, that they're going to be free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we will be free at last.
We talked to some people who aren't happy with the status quo, but also aren't comfortable voting for Donald Trump. If they don't vote at all, that lack of turnout could also affect a race that is so close. A glitch in Michigan during the last presidential election has sparked concern about violence at the polls.
If at any point in the polling location you feel intimidated, unsafe, the very first call that you should make is 911.
The push to restore faith in the voting process. The fight is on in Michigan to counter the rising tide of election denialism.
The systemic voter fraud that Donald Trump talks about doesn't exist.
But for years now, trust has been eroding.
In one Michigan county alone, 6,000 votes were switched.
One woman's mission to tell people the system works.
If you don't believe it, shame on you.
Nick Ferdin traveled to the Michigan county where some votes were initially miscounted last election. He found one strong voice trying to cut through the conspiracies.
I am fighting against election deniers. Donald Trump used Antrim County as an example that the election had been stolen. I can't let that happen in my county.
40 to 45% of American voters believe that there is systemic fraud.
If at any point in the polling location you feel intimidated, unsafe, the very first call that you should make is 911.
I'm in Michigan. Winning here goes a long way to deciding who will be the president of the United States. But there's something else at stake here, whether people even believe in elections at all anymore. Why will so many Americans not trust the results of their upcoming presidential election?
Oh, I'm up. Thank you, Sally. Thank you. I really appreciate all my workers, and you can see how many people are supporting me.
I find Cheryl Guy at a meet and greet at a bar in Antrim County, Michigan. Cheryl is trying to get re-elected as county clerk. It's an important job because clerks oversee voting during elections.
This election is election on steroids. We recovered from 2020, we owned the error that happened, and we paid the price.
That error from the 2020 election is the reason I'm here. Donald Trump seized on it as an example of widespread election fraud. A human error sent 6,000 votes for Biden that were meant for Trump. The mistake got fixed before the results were official, but that didn't matter.
In one Michigan county alone, 6,000 votes were switched from Trump to Biden, and the same systems are used in the majority of states in our country.
When Donald Trump on January 6th mentioned Antrim County, it was horrifying.
Cheryl, who had always worked in obscurity and a lifelong Republican, was suddenly called out as an enemy of Trump supporters.
I endured harassment, threats. One of the messages left that I deserved to be put in front of a firing squad.
Instead of backing down, Cheryl, even at 63 and a grandmother, became even more determined to prove that elections are fair.
So coming up in 2024, we've hired additional people to come in on election night. Now remember, they come in on election night, they don't leave till the next day. Good to see you.
Cheryl has a message for anyone who thinks there was fraud in her county or denies elections in the United States.
The checks and balances are there. If you don't believe it, shame on you. Because we go great lengths to make sure integrity, fairness, and we're well balanced in our elections.
I just want to thank everybody for coming out.
But not everyone believes Cheryl. I meet Tony Smedra in the crowd. Will you trust the outcome of the upcoming presidential election?
I do not. Yeah, a lot of shady stuff happened last time, and a lot of my people my age, they didn't even want to vote this time because they just think it's crooked, so there's no point.
What surprises me about Tony is that even though he doesn't believe elections are fair, he's running in one to be a county clerk. I guess I'm wondering, how come, if you didn't trust what happened in 2020, how come you trust the process enough that you want to get involved now?
I honestly don't, so that's why I am getting involved and going to be the inside man and see what's going on behind the scenes.
And what do you hope to find out?
Well, I hope that it's not as crooked and there's shady stuff going on, but I will find out.
Are you hopeful?
Yes, I'm very hopeful. My daughter just turned 18, so she's going to vote and spread the word to her friends so that there is hope.
Now, just to clarify, there have been many investigations into voter fraud since the 2020 election, and there was none. And if you don't believe me, here's lifelong Republican strategist Jason Rowe.
The systemic voter fraud that Donald Trump talks about doesn't exist. There is no evidence of it. We went from 7 to 5 to less than 5, but still ahead. But then as you start getting
Jason is the former executive director of the Michigan Republican Party. And in this election, he's trying to get a Republican to win a highly contested congressional race.
I mean, he's just playing up being the working class schlub.
Jason tells me that it may not be obvious, but there's a reason Trump is pushing election denial.
You know, I think he's trying to motivate his base to turn out because of the concerns of voter fraud. You know, certainly part of, I think, what all Republican candidates and consultants are at some way conveying is if you think there is going to be cheating and you want to make sure it doesn't matter, then get out there and vote.
Jason says election denial is basically mainstream now in the United States.
Do you run into election denial in your own life?
All the time. Even in the last couple weeks, I've run into people that would seem perfectly normal, suburban, college-educated parents. And the election comes up, and it's almost like clockwork. Oh, they're just going to rig it and steal it. Americans are so siloed now, have run into countless people who don't know anyone who voted for Joe Biden. So it's impossible for them to believe that Biden won.
On election night in 2020, in Detroit, hundreds of people believed the election was being stolen from Trump. They didn't know that what officials were actually doing was counting thousands of absentee ballots.
You see on the left-hand side.
Fast forward to today, and the mistrust still exists. So what do you do?
Certainly, we've seen some unprecedented times, and some polarizing times.
Lisa Lyons believes she knows how to fight election denial. She's the clerk in Kent County, Michigan, and she's in charge of training people to work the election.
If 2020 taught me anything, it's that the voters know very little about the process. And I really believe the key to trusting the process is education and participation. And that's kind of what I've made my mission the last 4 years. I want people to know what I know. I want them to have the same trust in the process that I have. I'm so thankful to have all of you stepping in and stepping up and playing a part of this true cornerstone of our republic.
And if people are going to take part in the election, one of Lisa's biggest challenges is to make sure they're safe.
I actually have had election inspectors who have come up to me on the street, they've seen me, and they say, you know, Lisa, I'm scared. I love working our elections, but I'm afraid. And my message to you, and if I leave you with nothing, do not be scared, because we are prepared.
This class, Lisa says, is an example of how there might just be a silver lining to the skepticism about elections.
And that's the expectation.
It used to be really hard to get people involved in them. Not anymore. Cindy Sullivan is training to be an election inspector.
As well.
Tell me why you thought it was important to come to this training today.
It's important because if there is fraud in the elections, in our government, then the people have a right to know. We have a right to know what's going on.
I asked Cindy why she's so skeptical.
From what I've seen on TV, from the news, the reports that I've seen, there could be fraud.
It makes me sad when I hear so many people not believe the outcome of the election, but I don't want to dismiss folks outright. I want to listen to them. I want them to have an opportunity to share their concern and to really meet that head on. But
And Lisa explains that that's the other way to regain trust in the election. Not to ignore people, no matter their beliefs.
It's so important to have faith in the process. Otherwise, what are we doing? You can't have a government of the people, by the people, and for the people if the people don't believe in it. Democracy doesn't happen without you. It truly doesn't. And our elections are really, they're a celebration. It's just a reminder of the blessings of liberty that we have here in this country. All right, thank you. Thanks so much.
Ian, to counterbalance what Lisa Lyons said there about election being a celebration, she also told me that 1/3 of election officials in the United States face harassment and intimidation.
That is obviously troubling. What are the plans for election night to try to keep people safe?
Well, in Antrim County, Cheryl Guy told me that there'll be extra police presence that day. They'll actually park a squad car outside of her offices as a deterrent. Her staff won't be using the front door for fear of harassment. And the county clerk in Antrim County, Cheryl Guy, told me she's actually a little bit afraid.
Nick Furton in Toronto tonight. Coming up, we took Cross Country Checkup on the road today, asking Canadians and Americans for their take on the presidential race, some with answers that may surprise you. We are in Detroit tonight after a special edition of Cross Country Checkup, co-produced with NPR, and looking into what's at stake in the U.S. election for people on both sides of the border. This is America Votes, a cross-border conversation.
Well, we are live in Detroit, taking your calls right now from across Canada and the United States.
Well, for me, the primary issue of most importance is women's rights. Primarily right now, reproductive freedoms, but not just reproductive freedoms.
I work in the U.S., and what really concerns me is that Mr. Trump's intention to renegotiate NAFTA.
I lived in the United States for 31 years as a Canadian. If I could vote, I would vote Donald Trump.
I'll be voting for Harris.
For me, the main issue makes all these other issues moot, and that is namely global warming and the environment.
I feel like we don't have two candidates to even consider.
That's it for this week. Thanks to everyone who called today. You've been listening to America Votes, a cross-border conversation on CBC and NPR stations across Canada and the United States. It was nice to go beyond the sound bites to hear U.S. voters speaking for, more than 15 or 20 seconds. And hopefully American listeners on NPR felt the same way about hearing Canadian voices. If you didn't get a chance to listen to it earlier today, you can go to the CBC Listen app. And special thanks to the public radio station here in Detroit, WDET. Well, thank you very much for being with us. You can watch anywhere, anytime on the free CBC News app and subscribe to the National's YouTube channel. I'm Ian Hannah-Mansing in Detroit. Good night.